contemporary man is blind to the fact that with all his rationality and efficiency, he is possessed by powers that are beyond his control. His gods and demons have not disappeared at all. They have merely got new names. They keep him on the run with restlessness, vague apprehensions, psychological complications, an insatiable need for pills, alcohol, tobacco, and food, and above all, a large array of neuroses. Carl Jung, Man and His Symbols.
There's no denying it. I'm dragging a bunch of fucking ghouls around with me.
So what is a ghost? All of you are ghosts with a body. Those who are walking and sitting, everybody, you are ghosts with a body. But suddenly somebody lost their body and you think they're something horrible. Why? They're just like you, they just lost the body.
My experiences began several years ago. My now wife and I went on a trip to Las Vegas. We were head over heels in love, and I proposed to her while we were there. A few months later, we found out that my fiancée was pregnant. We were quite excited and happy over the news, but planned on waiting 3 months before telling anyone. At the time, my wife's work environment was quite toxic socially. One day she called me, saying that she was having complications and headed to a rural hospital. I met her there as soon as I could, and found out that the situation was not good. She ended up losing the baby. It was very sad for us, but in that time, something miraculous happened. She began to feel little kicks in her womb, and it was discovered that she was still pregnant. It turns out that she had been carrying twins. Eventually, my lovely daughter Abigail was born. We still named the lost twin sister Peyton. Not long after bringing Abigail home, strange things began happening around the house. Things would go missing, and then suddenly appear in places that we had just looked. We would also see weird lights around the house. Our dog began acting strangely, getting nervous for no reason, and staring at empty corners of the room like he could see something. We ended up having another son, and both him and our daughter would act abnormally as well. We would hear them talking in empty rooms, as if they were having full conversations with an invisible person. When my son was 6, he had an allergic reaction to a bee sting and flatlined in the hospital. Thankfully, he was resuscitated, and when he came to, he told us that he had seen several deceased members of the family, some of whom he had never met, including Peyton. I'm more of a skeptic, and my wife is a believer. But both of us are sure that the ghost of Peyton followed us home that fateful day. Because as soon as we started acknowledging her, the activity calmed down. Still, we continue to have paranormal occurrences to this day. So this story, I think, encapsulates perfectly what a ghost is. I mean, if we're going on the traditional notion of a ghost, it's kind of a lost human soul that for one reason or another is stuck on the mortal plane. And this is usually because there was like a tragic event that might have happened in their life, some kind of unfinished business that the person during their lifetime wasn't able to properly process and reconcile. And so they weren't able to let go of that. And these feelings trap the person. And the idea is that really they can't move on until whatever it is that's holding them is dealt with. In a sense, I think ghosts represent the past and the unreconciled. And when we don't deal with those things, they come back to haunt us. So you have the parents who might have been dealing with their own reconciliation, getting over the loss of their daughter, and the spirit of their daughter who wanted, to have a life. And she comes back to haunt the parents, maybe to just simply to be acknowledged, maybe also to let them know that she was okay. It's kind of a reciprocal process going on here. Once she was acknowledged, then it seems that she was somewhat at peace. To me, ghost stories are really human stories.
I want to be the ruler of a foreign country, just as I've described it. Go ahead, Genie. Take over.
As you wish, Mr. Castle.
Mein Führer. What you ask for? Very quick and very painless, mein Führer.
This experience happened to me in high school. I'll start by saying that the Djinn do exist, and it is something I do not recommend you get wrapped up in, even if you are curious. I knew someone who was a keeper of the Djinn, which they had kept in a ring as a vessel. I acquired this ring, and before changing hands with the old keeper, we had to perform a complex bonding ritual that allowed me to become the new keeper. I wore this ring everywhere I went. This spirit was male and was known as an Ifrit, or fire Djinn, a specialist of love, passion, and relationships. This type was apparently not always good. He would speak to me and grant any wish that I would make. He told me up front that there would be consequences for my wishes. I said I wanted to make them anyway. He would reply by saying,
As you wish.
I know it's cliché, but that's what it said. I was always respectful and kind to him, as you should be with any Djinn or living creature on this planet. Despite this, many times my wishes were not granted in the way that I had hoped. My words would always be twisted to work against me. I didn't truly understand this at the time, but whenever a Djinn gives you something, it also takes something. And the bigger the wish, the higher the cost, to the point where they will even take someone's life. I met my soulmate with the help of this being, but since then, both he and I have been on the edge of death many times. One day, the Djinn showed itself to me. Allegedly, they can take any form they choose, but what I saw was an 8-foot-tall, alien-like being with reddish-tan skin. It was the scariest thing I've ever seen. Completely shocked and terrified, I grabbed a knife, but as soon as I did, it vanished. I kept this Djinn for a while, until one day the ring, along with the entity, simply disappeared. I had placed the ring on my bedside table, and the next thing I knew, it was gone. I never found that ring again. I do believe that they have free will, so maybe he felt that his work was done and wanted a new keeper. All in all, I think it is possible to befriend the Djinn, but deep down, due to my experiences, I believe they cannot be trusted. So the first thing I asked myself here was, why did this woman do this? I mean, like, I don't mean to judge or anything, but it's not even really like she was tricked into anything. This Djinn basically just told her straight up, like, yeah, you can get what you want, but there's gonna be consequences. I mean, maybe she just didn't understand the extent of those consequences. Maybe she was in like a desperate situation. But this is the Faustian bargain, where you're dealing with these dark entities, and they're typically associated with having influence or dominion over worldly, earthly matters. So if you want power, if you want wealth, something like that, these are things that on a spiritual level you shouldn't really be too concerned with. So it kind of makes sense that these demons or dark spirits would be in charge of that. And so this often involves some kind of heavy price to pay, a form of sacrifice. And this is really kind of the spiritual currency. You're asking for something that you don't really have a right to, and you have to pay the price. So this is kind of like a balancing of karma in a sense. I should ask this person, like, was it worth it? I mean, she met the love of her life, but like she said, they've kind of been in peril this whole time. So there's a tragic irony here in that there's always a twist that renders the thing that is attained useless. And isn't that kind of how life goes anyway? The Djinn aside, it seems that, when we get too greedy and overextend ourselves, it eventually comes back to bite us. And when we try to cheat our way there, it makes it even worse. For people who don't know what the Djinn are, these are essentially like another race of spiritual beings that were created by God. This is in the Islamic mythos. So they live alongside humans. They're said to be made of smokeless fire. And a lot of people relate this to the fairies. Some are good, some are bad. And I spoke to this Muslim guy who told me that basically everybody has a Djinn that is born with them. Sort of like the idea of a guardian angel, except this is like kind of the opposite. The idea of the guardian spirit that's attached to you from birth until death. It's also seen in Greek mythology, the daimon, which is usually an inherently good being. The famous example of this is Socrates. He had a daimon that he conferred with pretty much on a regular basis and who helped him with a lot of the ideas that he came up with throughout life. And it's said that when he ended up taking the hemlock, his daimon left him. So the Djinn are associated with magic and are invoked by people practicing magic. This is obviously where the whole genie and the 3 wishes thing comes from. The Djinn were given the Disney treatment much in the same way that fairies were with the portrayal of Tinkerbell. So I know it might seem a little weird that I keep bringing up magic. The average person probably associates it with, Harry Potter and weirdos. But the reason I mention it is that when we talk about these supernatural beings, we are often drawing from myths that are very old, and from a time when magic played an important role in society and was a part of everyday life for the average person. Before organized religion, magic was the answer to these supernatural threats, and many terrestrial threats that might have been believed to have supernatural causes. It was often used for practical purposes, like healing or driving away evil. There was no dogma, and it wasn't a centralized thing. It would have been unique to each region in which it existed. It was not a religion, but a method, with the only belief being that the combination of certain objects, words, and intentions, when combined, produce a magical effect that was more than the sum of its parts. It could and would be practiced by anyone. Today we refer to this as folk magic, kind of the magic of the people. So when we talk about these monsters and ghouls, we inevitably almost always run into the concept of magic. When you're practicing magic, essentially they believe, in the Islamic faith, they believe that you don't actually have any power to cast spells or do anything like that. When you do a ritual, essentially your Djinn is carrying it out. Your Djinn is the one with all the power, and your Djinn is the one who's actually doing these things and manifesting them. The other thing this guy told me was that to, at least for the bad ones, to summon them, he said that basically you just start defecating on the floors around your house, going to graveyards and doing various nefarious deeds. They seem to be drawn to just filthy things, and this brings up the idea of these dark spirits, kind of like I mentioned earlier. They're the antithesis of the light. You have these two diametrically opposed forces, which I guess you kind of look at as like the yin and yang. They're like balancing each other. But basically, these dark spirits are all about reversals. This is why you have like the upside down cross, the upside down pentagram. They love to go against order and natural law. Some of these like magician types think that they can rein in these entities and make them their bitch, essentially. I live in northwest Pennsylvania in a town about 7 miles from downtown Scranton. I'm not exactly in the sticks. The front of my neighborhood faces a major highway, but the back is all state game lands. I've seen some wildlife, turkeys, a deer here and there, and every skunk in the county apparently lives on my street. I don't see many squirrels, groundhogs, or chipmunks, which I always found was a bit odd. January 2019 was when my first encounter took place. It was just about dark, and I was in my house when I noticed something moving outside the window that faces my driveway. I looked closer and saw what I initially thought was a bear. It was some large animal on all fours and had its nose to the ground, kind of snuffling and working its head from side to side. It was walking down the driveway away from me. I watched this quote-unquote bear mosey down toward the street. I moved from the living room window to my bedroom window, which had a full view of the road where it was headed. As I kept watching, I noticed that something was wrong about this animal. From what I could make out in the dark, I could tell that this looked odd for a bear. But I just automatically assumed that that's what it had to be. all of a sudden, I watched this thing stand up on 2 legs and walk out into the road. It raised its head and started sniffing the air. At this point, I was certain this was no bear. I could see this thing clearly now. Its silhouette was defined under the streetlight. Exactly what I saw under that light is as follows. A bipedal canine-like creature, about 7 to 7.5 feet tall, which I could tell using the height of the light post as a reference. It had dark fur that was either gray or black. I couldn't be sure of this exactly due to the yellow hue of the light. It had high, pointed ears and a long muzzle. The next thing I noticed were its hands. Not paws, but hands, with long claws. They hung down from its arms, like its wrists were limp. Its arms were bent, and if fully extended downward, its hands would have hung below its knees. Its legs were digitigrade, walking on its toes with its calves bent backward like a dog. It looked heavily muscled, but had a tapered waist. It stood effortlessly, like this was its natural stance, and it moved smoothly in a way that looked like it was one fluid movement. As soon as I got a good look at this thing, an indescribable terror came over me that affected my whole body so intensely that I actually pissed myself. Meanwhile, it just casually walked across the road and then hunkered down in some scrub brush. The next thing I saw was the eyes. Bright blue eyes that lit up the darkness. And then I realized it was looking right at me. I could literally feel it when it did. Something about its eyes gave me the distinct impression that it was intelligent. At the mere sight of this thing, I lost my legs completely and sank down to the floor underneath the window. I was absolutely panicked. I was alone, and I had no idea what to do. My window is a picture window, big enough for this thing to easily climb through. I slowly got up to my knees and peeked over the windowsill, and it was gone. I scanned the whole area, but there was nothing. I couldn't tell if it had moved further into the forest, or if it had just decided to rest in that scrub brush where I last saw it. Eventually, after no sign of the creature, I just tried to go to bed. Suffice it to say, it was a totally sleepless night. After doing some research, I came to find out that this creature has allegedly been seen by people in many parts of the States and is most commonly referred to as Dogman. I have been in contact with witnesses who seem as honest and terrified as me. Since that night, I have seen less and less animals around the neighborhood. There used to be about 7 stray cats that I used to feed. All of them are gone now. Since that night, there have been strange sounds, tapping at my windows, which are too high for any normal animal or human to reach. And I often hear scratching on the siding of my house. A few times I've actually seen this thing peering through the windows. Now I keep the blinds closed at all times. I have no idea what this thing's intentions are. Despite all this creature does not seem aggressive. I didn't get a sense that it was angry that I had seen it, as has been reported by others. Maybe in that sense, I'm lucky? If its intention is to simply scare and get a rise out of me, I figure that ignoring it is the best option. Even if it's not, doing anything other than that would take some testicular fortitude that I simply do not have. Those of you who think you want to see this thing, I pray you never do. To this day, I cannot get a full night's sleep. I live alone, and every sound I hear after dark scares the living hell out of me. I will not leave my house at night. I feel like a prisoner in my own home. The worst part is knowing no matter what I do, this thing could get me if it wanted. It's so big and so fierce looking that I think my 357 would probably just ruffle its fur. I would never actively engage this thing. But I guess the fact that it hasn't got me by now means that it doesn't want to, which I guess is somewhat comforting. Since that day, I hoped I would never see it again. Sadly, that was not in the cards. But that's a story for another time. This experience has completely changed my worldview. Sometimes I can't help but wonder, if the Dogman is actually real, what the fuck else is? So these encounters with large cryptid animals seem to evoke this intense primordial fear in the witness. I think this may be ingrained in us from a time when human beings were actually hunted by large animals. The immediacy of the reaction to me suggests that somewhere in our subconscious we recognize this creature, even when our conscious mind doesn't. Maybe there was a time when humans had more direct contact with these creatures. In a sense, they embody the unknown and the dangers of the wilderness, of the American frontier. This has kind of become a part of our own contemporary American folklore. Alright, so the Dogman is, for those of you who don't know, essentially what is described in the story as a upright walking canine humanoid type creature. This was first documented back in the 1980s with the Beast of Bray Road, which was first kind of brought into the public spotlight by the journalist Linda Godfrey, who's subsequently done a lot of work documenting this phenomenon. Apparently, this is not a werewolf in the traditional sense, in that it doesn't transform. So it's considered to be separate from the werewolf myth. I guess this is because people have seen smaller baby dogmen, but I'm not sure how anyone would know this for sure. I mean, maybe little kids can transform into werewolves too. I think my 3-year-old niece might be one. One of her favorite things to do is to, roar like a monster. It's kind of her thing. Maybe I'll get an audio of it and use it in a story. Apparently people have been seeing this thing more and more in several different parts of the country and the world at large, actually. So I don't really know why that's going on. I mean, it's kind of a big question, right? Like, why are some things being seen in more frequency? And this seems to be happening all across the board, not just with Dogman. I mean, UFOs are on the uptick. So, I don't know. Is there some kind of force at work that is causing these things to happen? This activity has been going on for quite some time now with this guy, and I've kept in contact with him for at least a year, and he allowed me to tell this story only on the condition of basically letting people know that these things exist. And I can tell you that this guy is very genuine and very affected by what has been happening to him and continues to happen to this day. So although I can't know for sure, I've never seen anything like this. But first of all, these people are honest. They have nothing to really gain from coming out and saying this. The only thing they get is ridicule. I mean, these people don't get paid for being interviewed in a newspaper or something. So they really have no reason to make this stuff up. Of course, there are some hoaxers that are just looking for attention. But by and large, these are people who actually don't want to come out about what they've seen. And this, to me, kind of confirms their authenticity. So people are honest, and they're also not stupid either. That's another insult, presumption that the skeptics throw at these witnesses, that they're too stupid to identify a regular animal. Ironically, these skeptics probably have spent less time in the wilderness than the actual witnesses. Many of them are out there all the time, and they live in rural areas, and they fish and they hunt, and that's why they see these things, because they're in closer proximity. And that's also why they're credible witnesses, because they're around this stuff all the time, and so they know what things look like. That's number one. Second, the probability of unknown creatures is pretty high. We have this preconception in the modern world that everything has been figured out. We've been everywhere, we know everything, and anything outside of the realm of mainstream science basically just can't exist. But the reality is, there's a lot of places in the world that have yet to be explored. The wilderness is much more vast than we think it is. And a lot of these wilderness areas haven't even been explored by foot. There's plenty of places that we have never gone into. So the possibility is totally there that there could be things hiding that we would never know about. And there's examples of new species being found all the time in the rainforest. Creatures that we thought to have been extinct, like the coelacanth, the deep sea fish that was recently discovered. So it's totally plausible to me. I read a report that estimates that 97% of the world's species and plants haven't even been discovered yet. I mean, think about that. And this is without even getting into the idea of other dimensions or parallel universes and wormholes that connect them, which are now being theoretically confirmed by science. But it's not even necessary to bring that into the argument, because the world is vast and there are many unexplored places. Les Stroud brings up another point on the lack of physical remains. This is hard to come by even for regular animals, for the simple reason that scavengers dispose of them rather quickly. And then also, if these things have near-human intelligence, then they would know how to cover their tracks and even possibly bury their dead. So this intelligence, along with physical adaptations, which we could assume are geared towards their wilderness environments, would allow them to easily outmaneuver any humans that might be searching for them. So this could also explain why they're so elusive and why they can't be found or captured. Even people who accept that, they kind of point to just the the outlandishness of the idea of essentially a werewolf, existing, or Bigfoot or anything like that. But the way I look at it is it any stranger than an upright, hairless primate? I mean, why do we think that human beings are the only creature that can kind of evolve way outside of the norm that you see in the animal kingdom? I mean, what is it that makes us an exception? The other thing that a lot of people like to point to, the skeptics, is the lack of physical evidence. Well, first of all, we do have some evidence. We have footprints, tracks, and these have been examined by actual scientists and proven to be real. The way that the print is structured has all the hallmarks of being real, something that can't be replicated by a hoaxer. I mean, we have video of it, for God's sake, which has yet to be debunked. In fact, it's been proven to be pretty credible. I mean, the evidence is right in front of our faces, and people still say that there is none. I mean, it's fucking ridiculous. Sure, we don't have that smoking gun, but when you add up what we do have, along with the thousands of testimonials, it creates a pretty compelling picture that something strange is going on out there. And then the other aspect of it is that who knows how much evidence has been covered up. I mean, the government is notorious for keeping things under wraps and kind of hoarding knowledge for themselves. I mean, I'm sure that they know a lot of stuff that the rest of us don't. And a lot of these witnesses, whether it's Bigfoot witnesses, UFO witnesses, a lot of times it's followed up by a visit from the Men in Black, who usually coerce these people into keeping their mouths shut. They make them uncomfortable, they threaten them. Something has got to be going on here. I don't really know like what the motive is, other than maybe there's just certain things that they don't want people to know. The more they know and that others don't know, this gives them more power or control. And there could also be connotations to these phenomena that would really be earth-shattering, which maybe society just wouldn't be able to handle. But we live in pretty interesting times right now, and you see the government starting to become a little more open about this stuff. A lot of people think that disclosure might be on the horizon. I mean, I'm a little skeptical about that, but there are congressional investigations going on with the UFO stuff, certain admissions by the Pentagon that, yes, we have seen UFOs and we don't know what they are, and they're observed to be doing stuff that is way outside our technological capabilities. And I know I'm not going to change anybody's mind on this. I mean, you're either open to it or you aren't. And I don't really care if people believe in this stuff. My goal is just to spotlight their ignorance. The last thing I wanted to mention about all this is, so this guy, lately, he's been having paranormal activity as well. So this is kind of the hidden underbelly of the whole cryptozoology thing, is that there's actually paranormal stuff going on surrounding it. Either these things are seen doing paranormal things like disappearing, coming through portals, or they're seen in concurrence with UFOs or other paranormal phenomenon. And this is a thing that I think a lot of the Bigfoot hunters and the cryptozoologists, they kind of ignore it, they push it to the side and conveniently overlook the large number of reports that involve something like this. And I think this is because these people kind of have a hard enough time as it is to be taken seriously by the mainstream scientific community. So to add the whole paranormal thing on top of that, they probably think it's not going to do them any favors, really, if they're trying to petition to have these things, like, officially investigated. I mean, that being said, you still can't, you can't deny it. I mean, the journalist Linda Godfrey that I mentioned earlier, she has interviewed witnesses, like, there's one I'm thinking of that was a farmer, and he had some kind of large, cryptid stalking the property. And one day there was snowfall in the fields, and basically you had these footprints that just appeared in the middle of the fields, and went on for, however many yards, and then just stopped. Also, just in the middle of the field, these things completely stopped. So there was no way, for this thing to go off somewhere else. What it looked like essentially is that this thing materialized and then dematerialized. This whole thing is a lot stranger than some people want to admit. And one of the things I always point to is these triangle areas. The most well-known one is the Bermuda Triangle. And these are basically zones of all manner of strange paranormal activity. And they're all over the world. I mean, I have one in my state of Massachusetts, the Bridgewater Triangle. And essentially these areas, they have UFO activity, Bigfoot activity, and all kinds of stuff. And that's not to say that Bigfoot are flying around in UFOs. But what I think is going on is that these areas are essentially like portals. They're like portals to interdimensional highways. And all of these things being interdimensional are kind of using the same means to travel into and out of this world. That's kind of the thing that makes the most sense to me. And these triangle areas usually have strange electromagnetic phenomenon. So this could kind of hint at this energy system. You have the ley lines, and a lot of these triangles line up with the ley lines. And the idea is that there's this energy grid of some unknown energy that science really hasn't been able to define or to quantify, but that seems to be there. I mean, this could be dark matter. This could be dark energy. We know it's there, but we don't know what it is. So to me, it's either all or nothing. Either none of this exists at all, or it's the strangest thing that you can possibly imagine, and every theory is correct. There's no in-between for me. That may not be the most rational thing, but I don't know. That's how I feel. Alright, so that's it. If anybody listening has a story, feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from you. I have the email linked. You can send it to there and we can get in touch. If I get more stories, then maybe you guys won't have to hear me ramble so much to fill up the time. I think it's important to reach out to these people and to give them a platform, because a lot of people are scared to talk about it. I mean, in many of these cases, the people have told me that they can't even reach out to their family or friends about it, which is like horrible, because most of the time these are not like fun things to deal with. Like, a lot of the people are left traumatized, or just their minds are completely blown from it, and they feel like they can't talk to anybody about it. So it can be a very isolating experience for people. I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you guys next time.